The frozen forests of Belgium held secrets on that December morning in 1944, secrets that Klaus Wendel would carry with him for the rest of his life, however long that might be. As an Unteroffizier in the Wehrmacht, he sat hunched in the cramped turret of his Panther tank, his gloved hands fumbling with a pencil that seemed determined to snap in the bitter cold. The date was December 19th, and the time showed 23 minutes past 6 in the morning. Outside Neuville, the darkness still clung to the trees like a stubborn memory, and Wendel was trying to capture his thoughts in his personal notebook before the day's fighting began. His breath created small clouds in the confined space as he wrote about something that had been haunting him and his comrades. There was a new predator in these woods, an American hunter that they could hear but never actually see. The sound would reach their ears, but by the time they managed to get their turret turned around to face the threat, whatever had been there was already gone, vanished like smoke. Just the previous day, 3 Tigers had been knocked out, massive machines reduced to burning hulks by an enemy they barely glimpsed. Through the commander's cupola, Wendel stared out into the pre-dawn gloom of the Ardennes, knowing that somewhere beyond those tree lines, the Americans were already positioning their machines. What he couldn't have known, sitting there in that moment, was that in less than 20 minutes, everything he understood about how armoured combat worked was about to be completely overturned. His Panther carried a 75mm gun capable of punching through any American tank at 2,000 metres, and its frontal armour could bounce most of what the Allies threw at it. This machine represented the very best of what German engineering could produce, heavy and powerful and methodical in its approach to war. Yet within just 3 minutes of making contact with the enemy, Wendel would watch multiple German tanks get destroyed by vehicles moving at speeds that German armour couldn't manage even on good paved roads, let alone in these conditions. The Battle of the Bulge had entered its 4th day by this point, and across the snow-covered forests stretching through Belgium and Luxembourg, German tank crews were coming to a terrifying realization. The Americans had created something that hunted in a completely different way than any armoured vehicle anyone had seen before. It wasn't stronger or heavier, just impossibly, unimaginably faster than anything that should have been able to survive on a battlefield. The vehicles belonged to the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion, and they were called Hellcats. The story of how these machines came to exist began back in December of 1941, right as America was entering the war. While German tank philosophy had evolved around the concept of overwhelming firepower combined with heavy protection, leading them to build 45-ton Panthers and nearly 70-ton King Tigers, the American designers at General Motors had taken an approach so radically different that it would end up terrorizing German crews 3 years down the line. The tank destroyer force came into being under General Leslie McNair's directive on November 21st of that year, operating on a straightforward principle that got documented in Field Manual FM 18-5. The principle was simple: seek out enemy tanks, strike them hard, and destroy them. The emphasis fell on speed and firepower rather than armour protection. The M18, which carried the designation T-70 during its development phase, would embody this philosophy to such an extreme degree that German tank designers would have considered it suicidal. Buick Motor Division up in Flint, Michigan received the contract in January 1942, and their chief engineer, Joseph Roberts, found himself facing specifications that seemed to contradict each other at every turn. Mount a 76mm high-velocity gun capable of destroying any German tank, maintain a low profile so the vehicle could hide effectively, and achieve speeds exceeding 50 miles per hour, all while keeping the total weight under 20 tons. The solution they came up with defied every conventional principle of tank design. The armour on the M18 measured just 25.4mm at its thickest point on the turret front, with only 12.7mm on the hull front, barely enough to stop heavy machine gun fire. A German 88mm shell wouldn't just penetrate this armour, it would pass completely through both sides of the vehicle. The entire design prioritised mobility above everything else, accepting vulnerability as the price of speed. The real introduction to what would become their nightmare came for German tank crews during the breakout from Normandy. On July 29, 1944, near a place called Coutances in France, elements of German heavy tank battalions started filing disturbing reports about engagements with American tank destroyers that seemed to disappear before the Germans could even return fire. The after-action reports documented enemy vehicles exhibiting speeds they estimated at 80 kilometers per hour over rough terrain, with engagement times from first shot to final sighting of approximately 180 seconds, just 3 minutes from start to finish. The mathematics of the situation were both simple and absolutely terrifying when you broke them down. A Panther tank's turret required a full 60 seconds to complete one rotation, and its maximum speed topped out at 34 miles per hour on roads, dropping to 15 miles per hour cross-country. The M18 Hellcat could accelerate from 0 to 30 miles per hour in 7 seconds, maintain 55 miles per hour on roads, hit 60 without the governor, and sustain 26 miles per hour even cross-country. In the 3 minutes it took a German crew to identify where the threat was coming from, rotate their turret to face it, acquire the target properly, and get off a shot, the Hellcat could displace itself nearly 1.5 miles away. The fear German crews felt wasn't irrational or exaggerated. The M18's 76mm M1A2 gun couldn't penetrate Panther frontal armor with standard M62A PCBC ammunition. That much was true, but it could easily defeat the 40mm side armor at 1,500 meters. With M93 HVAP tungsten core rounds, though these were severely limited in supply with crews receiving only 1 or 2 rounds monthly if they were lucky, penetration reached 157mm at 500 yards. The gun's muzzle velocity of 2,600 feet per second meant the shell arrived at its target before the sound of the shot even reached you. German doctrine emphasized methodical engagement, careful acquisition of targets, deliberate aiming, and conservation of ammunition. Crews drilled extensively on fighting from static positions, using terrain features to create hull-down placements where only their turret showed. The Panther and Tiger were designed with this doctrine in mind, heavily armoured machines with powerful guns built for slow but steady advancement. The Hellcat shattered every single aspect of this training and doctrine. M18 crews received their training at Camp Hood, Texas, a facility established specifically as the Tank Destroyer Tactical and Firing Center, covering 158,706 acres of ground. They were taught to never remain stationary for more than 30 seconds after firing a shot. The motto became, "Speed is life," and it wasn't just a catchy phrase, but actual doctrine. Where German doctrine emphasized making that one decisive shot count, American tank destroyer doctrine preached shoot and scoot, fire your shot and immediately displace to a new position. Between July 1943 and October 1944, Buick's plant in Flint produced exactly 2,507 M18 Hellcats, far fewer than the originally planned 8,986 vehicles. The production run included 6 pilot models, an initial contract for 1,000 vehicles, and a final order of 1,507 units. Peak monthly production reached 267 units in November of 43. This production rate was modest compared to Sherman tank output, but it still exceeded what Germany could manage with Panther production. While Germany struggled to produce 90 Panthers monthly by late 1944, the American factories had already completed the entire Hellcat production run. This disparity meant that while German crews knew each lost Panther or Tiger was essentially irreplaceable given production limitations, American forces could rapidly replace any losses they suffered. The M18 featured a Wright R975 radial engine that had originally been designed for aircraft use. Early production vehicles, serial numbers 1 through 1350, used the naturally aspirated R975C1, producing 350 horsepower, while later models from serial 1351 through 2507 received the supercharged R975C4, generating 400 horsepower beginning in March 1944. This power output, combined with the vehicle's weight of 17.7 to 20 tons, sources vary based on configuration and equipment, created an exceptional power-to-weight ratio of 32.5 horsepower per ton, compared to just 15 horsepower per ton for the Panther. The Hellcat's hydromatic automatic transmission with torque converter allowed drivers to maintain maximum speed while maneuvering, a critical advantage over German tanks that required manual shifting and clutch operation. The ground pressure came in at just 10.5 pounds per square inch, less than many wheeled vehicles, which meant Hellcats could traverse mud and snow that would immobilize 57-ton Tiger I tanks with their 15.2 psi ground pressure and 69.8-ton Tiger IIs that put even more pressure on the ground beneath them. The breakout from Normandy in August 1944 provided the first large-scale demonstration of how Hellcat doctrine worked in practice. During Operation Cobra beginning July 28th, the 603rd Tank Destroyer Battalion, which had received M18s back in October 43 and landed at Utah Beach on July 21st and 22nd, participated in the sweep through Brittany. The 704th and 705th Battalions, also equipped with M18, joined in the rapid advance. Traditional tank warfare doctrine would have dictated careful, covered approaches and sustained firefights at range. Instead, M18 crews executed what became known as rapid flanking attacks, using their superior speed to strike from unexpected directions before German turrets could traverse to meet the threat they suddenly faced. The Battle of Aracourt, fought from September 18th through 29th, 1944, near the Nancy bridgehead across the Moselle River, demonstrated the M18's potential when crews employed it properly. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, attached to the 4th Armoured Division's Combat Command A, faced elements of the German 113th Panzer Brigade, in conditions that should have favoured the defenders. On September 19th, Lieutenant Edwin Leipzig's platoon engaged German armour in heavy fog at extremely close range with visibility limited to just 30 feet. In the first 5 minutes of combat, his M18s destroyed 5 German tanks while losing just 1 vehicle. The engagement continued, with 10 additional enemy tanks destroyed for the loss of 2 more M18. Captain Tom Evans earned the Distinguished Service Cross after personally manning a disabled M18's gun to destroy enemy panzer. The overall results at Aracourt were staggering when you looked at the numbers. 39 German tanks destroyed for 4 M18s lost and 3 damaged, giving a kill ratio of 5.6 to 1 that validated the entire tank destroyer concept. The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 became the Hellcat's most legendary proving ground, the place where it would cement its reputation. The 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion, which General A.D. Bruce had described as the finest tank destroyer battalion yet trained, rushed forward to help defend Bastogne, providing critical armoured support for the 101st Airborne Division trapped there. On December 19th through 20th, near Neuville, M18AS from both the 609th and 705th Tank Destroyer Battalions engaged elements of the 2nd Panzer Division. The 609th arrived first with Team des Aubry, inflicting 600 to 1,000 German casualties while achieving a crucial 48-hour delay that helped stabilize the situation. The 705th would later receive a Presidential Unit Citation for their actions at Bastogne from December 18th through 27th. On Christmas Day alone, the 705th destroyed 27 German tanks while losing 6 M18s engaging the 15th Panzer Grenadier Division, maintaining exceptional kill ratios even in the most desperate fighting. Overall, during the siege of Bastogne, the 705th destroyed approximately 40 German tanks for 6 M18 losses, achieving a 6.7 to 1 kill ratio. The Hellcat's advantages actually increased in adverse conditions rather than decreasing. While German heavy tanks struggled badly in mud and snow, The M18's lightweight design and low ground pressure allowed maintained mobility when their enemies bogged down. During the opening phase of the bulge, heavy fog grounded all air support and limited visibility to under 100 meters. German doctrine relied heavily on long-range gunnery superiority, which was now completely negated by the weather. Hellcat crews, trained for close-range ambush tactics at Camp Hood's Revolutionary Battle Conditioning course, thrived in these exact conditions. The M18's lightweight provided strategic mobility that German heavy tanks simply couldn't match at all. While a King Tiger required Class 70 bridges, which were rare in Europe, the M18 could cross Class 24 bridges, basically any structure that could support a loaded truck. This advantage proved decisive during the Rhine crossings later in the war. While German heavy tanks searched desperately for intact bridges strong enough to support their weight, Hellcats crossed on temporary structures that combat engineers had erected. The mathematics of industrial capacity were inescapable when you looked at production figures. While American factories built 2,507 M18 Hellcats between July 43 and October 44, Germany struggled throughout the entire war to produce heavy tanks in meaningful numbers. Total Panther production reached approximately 6,000 vehicles over the course of the war, while only 492 King Tigers and 1,347 Tiger I tanks were ever built. For every Panther produced, America built 8 tank destroyers and tanks total. German tank crews faced not just superior tactics, but overwhelming numbers that kept getting worse. American production included 49,234 M4 Shermans, 2507 M18 Hellcats, 2324 M10 tank destroyers, 20073 M36 tank destroyers, plus 88,410 other armored vehicles of various types. American Hellcat crews received extensive training at Camp Hood, later renamed Fort Hood in Texas. The Tank Destroyer School's program included 17 weeks of intensive training with emphasis placed on speed, mobility, and individual initiative. The facility, initially commanded by Lieutenant Colonel, later Brigadier General Andrew D. Bruce, could train 100,000 soldiers simultaneously with 28 battalions and 8 groups in various stages of preparation at any given time. Crews practiced high-speed firing, rapid displacement, and coordinated attacks until these actions became completely instinctive, muscle memory rather than conscious thought. The Revolutionary Battle Conditioning course, originally called the Tank Hunting course, became the first U.S. Army training program to employ live fire overhead, with trainees spending a full week in simulated combat conditions that came as close to the real thing as training could get. By late 1944, American tank destroyer doctrine had evolved significantly from its initial concepts into proven combat techniques refined by actual battlefield experience. FM 18-5, published back in June 42, stated clearly that there is but one battle objective of tank destroyer units, the destruction of hostile tanks. General Bruce later clarified that seek meant vigorous reconnaissance to find the enemy, strike meant destruction through gunfire rather than charges, and destroy meant elimination through superior tactics and positioning. Combat experience in North Africa and Italy modified these concepts considerably. The North African battles taught that pure offensive charges against prepared positions were suicidal. Instead, aggressive spirit had to be combined with stealth and deception to become the cornerstone of successful tank destroyer employment. M18 crews developed what they called Wolfpack tactics, where 3 or 4 Hellcats operated in coordinated but independent attacks, communicating by radio to create overlapping fields of fire while maintaining constant movement that made them nearly impossible to pin down. By the time the war ended in Europe, M18 Hellcat units had achieved truly remarkable combat statistics that validated their entire approach. The Army Historical Foundation documents 526 total enemy armoured vehicle kills, with 498 in Europe, 17 in Italy, and 11 in the Pacific Theatre. With approximately 216 M18s lost to enemy fire in the European theatre alone, this produced an overall kill-to-loss ratio of 2.4 to 1 or 2.3 to 1 specifically in Europe, the highest ratio achieved by any American tank or tank destroyer during the entire war. Individual unit achievements often exceeded even these impressive averages. The 603rd Tank Destroyer Battalion destroyed upwards of 90 enemy armoured fighting vehicles. The 704th achieved similar numbers, with their Aracourt engagement alone accounting for 39 confirmed kills. The 705th's performance at Bastogne, 40 tanks destroyed for 6 lost, demonstrated sustained excellence under the most difficult conditions. The 601st Tank Destroyer Battalion achieved the highest documented ratio at nearly 23 to 1, an almost unbelievable figure. Loss analysis revealed interesting patterns about how M18s were knocked out when they did suffer casualties. Between 40 and 50% of M18 casualties resulted from enemy tanks and anti-tank guns exploiting the vehicle's minimal armour, while 25 to 35% stemmed from mechanical breakdowns rather than enemy action. The remaining losses came from infantry anti-tank weapons like Panzerfausts, artillery fire, and mines. The fundamental difference between German and American armoured vehicle design philosophy becomes crystal clear when you compare the actual specifications side by side. The Panther weighed exactly 44.8 to 45 tons, with 80mm frontal armour sloped at 55 degrees. Effective thickness approximately 140mm. The Tiger Y weighed 57 tons, with 100.8mm vertical frontal armour. The King Tiger reached 69.8 tons, with 150mm sloped frontal armour and 180mm turret armour, a mobile fortress. Against all of this, the M18 Hellcat weighed just 17.7 to 20 tons, with armour ranging from 12.7mm on the hull to 25.4mm on the turret front, thinner than some German armoured cars. Yet this apparent vulnerability enabled the speed that became its primary defence mechanism. German heavy tanks' reliability problems became legendary among both sides. Panthers were more likely to be lost to mechanical failure than enemy action in many engagements. Meanwhile, the M18's simplified design, using proven automotive components wherever possible, ensured consistent operational readiness that kept them in the fight. American logistical superiority amplified the M18's effectiveness tremendously. While German tanks often sat idle for lack of fuel, spare parts, or ammunition, Hellcat units maintained high operational rates through efficient supply chains that kept them moving. The famous Red Ball Express and similar logistics operations ensured consistent fuel deliveries, while standardized parts meant easy field maintenance by mechanics who knew these systems inside and out. German forces by late 1944 faced chronic fuel shortages that crippled their operations. Operation Watch on the Rhine, the German offensive into the Ardennes, partially aimed to capture Allied fuel dumps because German supplies couldn't sustain prolonged operations on their own anymore. This fuel situation meant German tanks often fought defensively from static positions, exactly the scenario where the mobile Hellcat held maximum advantage. Every M18 carried both radio and intercom systems that worked reliably, using SCR-508 or SCR-528 radio sets that provided consistent communication between vehicles. German tanks, especially by late 1944, often operated with degraded or completely non-functional communications equipment, relying instead on signal flags or pre-battle planning that couldn't adapt to changing situations. This seemingly minor detail had major tactical implications on the battlefield. Hellcat platoons could coordinate their attacks in real time, adjusting instantly to German responses and exploiting opportunities as they appeared. When 4 Hellcats attacked from different directions, they operated as a single organism through radio coordination, each vehicle aware of what the others were doing. German tanks, often fighting in communication isolation, couldn't begin to match this flexibility and coordination. Before the Hellcat's legendary performance in northwest Europe captured everyone's attention, the Italian campaign had provided German forces with their first warnings about what was coming. In May 1944, during the breakout from Anzio, the 894th Tank Destroyer Battalion faced elements of the Hermann Göring Panzer Division in terrain that should have worked against them. The rolling hills, covered with vineyards and stone walls, should have neutralized the M18's speed advantage completely. Instead, it actually amplified their psychological impact on the Germans. The Hellcats used their ability to accelerate up 30-degree slopes at speeds German tanks couldn't achieve on flat ground, creating an illusion of omnipresence by appearing at multiple points along ridgelines in rapid succession, giving the impression there were far more of them than actually existed. This early demonstration of Hellcat capabilities went largely unheeded by German high command, who remained focused on the Eastern Front, where most of their armour was committed fighting the Soviets. Winter 1944–45 proved that the Hellcat's advantages actually increased rather than decreased in adverse weather conditions. The M18's wide tracks and lightweight construction, producing just 10.5 pounds per square inch of ground pressure, allowed movement through snow that trapped much heavier vehicles in place. German Tigers and Panthers, already struggling with mechanical reliability under the best conditions, found their mobility further reduced by winter weather. During the Battle of the Bulge, Hellcat crews exploited these conditions expertly, using their speed to race through areas where German heavy tanks had bogged down completely, appearing behind German lines in places where heavy armour was thought to be impossible. This mobility and poor conditions contributed significantly to the successful defence of Bastogne and the eventual defeat of the offensive. German forces attempted various counter-tactics against the growing Hellcat threat as they tried to adapt. Updated tactical manuals recommended immediate smoke deployment when M18s were identified, essentially blinding themselves in hopes the threat would pass by before finding them. Other desperate measures included welding additional track links onto side armour for extra protection, though this proved ineffective against 76mm rounds, and creating deliberate ambushes with hidden anti-tank guns positioned to catch the fast-moving vehicles. Nothing worked consistently enough to matter. The Hellcat's combination of speed, firepower, and tactical flexibility proved insurmountable with the resources Germany had available at that stage of the war. The vehicle's very presence in a sector altered German behaviour in measurable ways. Commanders became reluctant to commit armour without extensive reconnaissance first, sacrificing initiative and momentum to caution, slowing down operations that needed speed to succeed. In March 1945, near Remagen, M18AS from the 656th Tank Destroyer Battalion crossed the captured Ludendorff Bridge while it was too damaged for heavier vehicles to risk crossing. They established a defensive screen on the far side that destroyed 11 German tanks attempting to approach the bridge, including 2 King Tigers that couldn't maneuver quickly enough in the confined terrain along the river. This action demonstrated the strategic value of the M18's lightweight construction beyond just tactical mobility. While German heavy tanks required specific routes and specially reinforced bridges that limited their operational flexibility, Hellcats could use any crossing that supported truck traffic, appearing in what the Germans considered impossible locations deep behind their lines. April 1945 saw the Ruhr pocket become a massive trap for German Army Group B as Allied forces closed in from all sides. The 893rd Tank Destroyer Battalion's Hellcats conducted what military historians consider exemplary tank destroyer operations, racing through collapsing German lines at speeds approaching 60 miles per hour on cleared sections of the Autobahn, appearing deep in German rear areas before commanders even knew the front lines had been penetrated. These final operations demonstrated the M18's capabilities pushed to their absolute limits, with speed used as a weapon in itself, mobility serving as armour, and surprise as the primary tactic that kept them alive. German defensive positions that had been carefully designed to stop deliberate attacks by heavy tanks proved completely useless against vehicles that simply raced around them at highway speeds, bypassing strong points entirely. Post-war analysis conducted by US Army historians validated the M18 concept despite its obvious limitations in certain areas. The 76mm gun's inability to penetrate Panther or Tiger frontal armor with standard ammunition forced absolute reliance on flanking attacks, missions where the vehicle's speed became not just useful, but essential for survival. With standard M62 APCBC rounds achieving only 93mm of penetration at 500 yards and the scarce HVAP rounds rarely available, crews had to close to suicidal ranges for frontal engagements against German heavy tanks, something they avoided whenever remotely possible. Yet the combat record speaks definitively regardless of theoretical limitations. 526 confirmed kills against 216 combat losses produced the highest kill-to-loss ratio of any American armored vehicle fielded during the entire war. This success came not from superior firepower or protection, which the vehicle obviously lacked, but from revolutionary employment of speed and mobility combined with superior crew training that taught them to fight smart rather than strong. The M18 Hellcat represented much more than just another armoured vehicle in the vast inventory of World War II equipment. It embodied a completely different concept of how armoured warfare could be conducted. While Germany had perfected the tank as a breakthrough weapon and mobile fortress that could dominate the battlefield through sheer power, America had created something genuinely new, the tank destroyer as pure hunter that stalked its prey. The tank destroyer force's motto of seek, strike and destroy proved prophetic when you looked at the final accounting. By war's end, American tank destroyer battalions claimed over 11,000 enemy vehicles destroyed in total across all theatres, with Hellcat units achieving the highest kill-to-loss ratios within that impressive total. The doctrine emphasized that tank destroyers were not tanks and absolutely shouldn't try to fight like tanks. They were hunters that struck from ambush and then vanished before the enemy could respond, a completely different animal. Beyond tactical success on individual battlefields, the Hellcat achieved strategic effects that influenced entire campaigns. German armoured reserves, instead of being concentrated for offensive operations as doctrine dictated, were increasingly held back to guard against potential tank destroyer raids that might appear anywhere. The mere presence of Hellcat units in a sector could freeze German armoured movement for hours, while commanders sought confirmation of their exact locations and strength. During the Ardennes offensive, intercepted German communications revealed commanders specifically requesting verification that no Hellcats were present in their sector before they would commit their reserves forward. Hours were lost to reconnaissance, momentum sacrificed to caution born of fear. The offensive that was supposed to split the Allied forces and potentially change the course of the war was partially paralysed by fear of vehicles weighing less than half what a Panther weighed. The 2507 Hellcats that got built represented American industrial philosophy at its finest. Not perfection or engineering monuments, but practical efficiency that got the job done. While Germany built 6,000 Panthers over 3 years of production, struggling constantly with quality control issues and component shortages that slowed output, Buick produced all M18s in just 15 months using proven components and simplified construction methods. German engineers, when they managed to examine captured M18s in detail, noted what they perceived as apparent crudity in the construction. Functional welds rather than perfect joints, armor plates showing tool marks from manufacturing, interior ergonomics that seemed almost accidental rather than carefully planned. Yet this supposedly crude vehicle consistently destroyed German tanks that had been built with watchmaker precision and engineering excellence. The difference lay fundamentally in design philosophy and what each side prioritized. Germany built engineering monuments that showcased their technical prowess, while America built practical tools designed to win battles. Behind all the statistics and production figures and kill ratios lay human tragedy affecting both sides of this conflict. Young German tankers, many of them barely out of their teenage years by 1945, faced an enemy that negated everything they had been taught in training. Their carefully maintained Panthers and Tigers, machines representing the absolute peak of German armoured engineering, burned just as readily when struck by Hellcat rounds fired from ambush positions they never saw. American crews, while suffering far fewer losses overall, carried their own burdens from the fighting. The speed that saved their lives also meant striking without warning, often giving German crews no real chance to surrender or escape from their doomed vehicles. The minimal armour that made the Hellcat so fast meant that when M18s did get hit, catastrophic losses often resulted with the entire crew killed, though interestingly, the open-topped turret design actually improved crew survival rates to over 80% compared to just 35% for German heavy tank crews who were sealed inside their vehicles. The M18 Hellcat's influence extended well beyond World War II into modern military thinking. Post-war armies around the world studied its employment carefully, recognizing that mobility could trump protection in certain tactical circumstances, a lesson that influenced armoured doctrine development for decades. Modern military doctrine's emphasis on shoot and scoot tactics, rapid displacement after firing, and mobility as a survival technique rather than just an offensive tool, all trace their roots directly back to M18 employment during 1944 through 45. Today at Fort Moore, formerly known as Fort Benning before the renaming, a restored M18 Hellcat stands prominently at the Armour School entrance. Its commemorative plaque identifies it as the fastest armoured fighting vehicle of World War II, and proof that American ingenuity combined with mass production capability could defeat what seemed like superior enemy equipment. The final accounting makes for impressive reading when you compile all the numbers together. Production total manufactured was 2507 vehicles. Production period ran from July 1943 to October 1944, a span of just 15 months. Peak production hit 267 units in November 1943. Unit cost came to $57,500 in 1943 money. Production location was Buick Division's plant in Flint, Michigan. Performance specifications showed maximum speed of 55 miles per hour with governor engaged, 60 miles per hour without the governor limiting it. Acceleration from 0 to 30 miles per hour took 7 seconds. Range was 100 to 105 miles depending on terrain and driving conditions. Power-to-weight ratio was 20 to 22.5 horsepower per ton depending on the specific vehicle configuration. Ground pressure measured just 10.5 pounds per square inch. The combat record showed enemy vehicles destroyed at 526 confirmed kills. M18 CES lost to enemy fire totaled 216 vehicles. Overall kill ratio worked out to 2.4 to 1. European theatre ratio specifically was 2.3 to 1. Comparative German tank specifications provided stark contrast. The Panther weighed 44.8 to 45 tons with 15 horsepower per ton and 34 miles per hour maximum speed. Tiger the Fly weighed 57 tons with 100 mm frontal armour and only 1,347 produced total. Tiger II weighed 69.8 tons with 150 mm frontal armour and just 492 produced over the entire war. The supreme irony of the entire Hellcat story becomes clear when you examine how German doctrine itself created the perfect conditions for American success. By building increasingly heavy tanks with each new model, Panthers followed by Tigers followed by King Tigers, Germany created slow, road-bound targets that were perfect victims for Hellcat tactics. Had Germany continued developing lighter, more mobile tanks instead of pursuing the super-heavy tank concept, the Hellcat's advantages would have been minimized significantly. Every single ton that got added to German tanks made them more vulnerable to American tank destroyers rather than less. The pursuit of supposedly invulnerable supertanks created vehicles that couldn't respond effectively to high-speed warfare. In building fortresses on tracks, Germany became vulnerable to enemies that fought more like cavalry, racing around strong points with guns that struck hard and then vanished before any retaliation was possible. The M18 Hellcat proved a lesson that applies far beyond World War II armoured combat. Victory doesn't require having the best equipment in every category, it requires having the right equipment properly employed for the specific situation you face. German crews sitting in their magnificent Panthers and Tigers, machines that represented the pinnacle of armoured fighting vehicle design, were defeated consistently by American crews in vehicles that seemed impossibly vulnerable on paper. It remains one of military history's great examples of doctrine defeating technology, or perhaps more accurately, of pragmatic doctrine defeating technological obsession. Military historian Stephen Zaloga characterized the M18 as poorly balanced while noting its success was attributable to the training and dedication of its crews, rather than to what he called its ill-conceived design. Yet this assessment arguably misses a crucial point about what made the vehicle successful. The supposedly poor balance of extreme speed over armor protection was precisely what enabled the revolutionary tactics that produced that highest kill-to-loss ratio of any American armored vehicle in the war. The imbalance wasn't a flaw to be overcome, it was the entire point of the design. For German tank crews operating in 1944 and 45, 3 minutes defined their fate when Hellcats appeared. 3 minutes from the first sound of those high-revving American engines somewhere in the distance to the impact of 76mm rounds tearing through their tank's side armor. 3 minutes to somehow identify exactly where the threat was coming from in thick forest or rolling terrain, traverse their turret to face it, acquire the target in their sights, and fire an accurate shot, all while the Hellcat was already racing away to its next firing position at 55 miles per hour or better. 3 minutes that usually ended with their tank burning fiercely and the Hellcat already vanishing into the distance or behind cover, seeking its next victim among the German armoured columns. The Hellcat proved decisively that in modern industrialised warfare, speed doesn't just provide an advantage, it can render raw strength completely irrelevant. The German crews who actually survived those 3-minute encounters learned a lesson that would reshape armoured warfare doctrine for every military that studied these engagements. Sometimes the best armour isn't thick steel plate, but simply not being where the enemy can shoot you when they pull the trigger. Sometimes the most powerful gun isn't the biggest caliber, but the one that fires from where the enemy doesn't expect and can't immediately respond to. Sometimes the greatest victory comes not from building the absolute strongest tank possible, but from building exactly the right tank for the specific war you're actually fighting rather than the one you wish you were fighting. In those 3 minutes of combat lay the fundamental difference between old military thinking and new approaches, between fighting the previous war and adapting to fight the current one, between pursuing theoretical perfection and embracing pragmatic solutions that actually worked. The M18 Hellcat, perpetually under-armoured, outgunned in frontal engagements by German heavy tanks, dismissed by some critics as poorly designed or unbalanced, achieved what German supertanks ultimately could not deliver. It achieved actual battlefield dominance through speed, through superior crew training, and through revolutionary employment that threw out the old rulebook. For German tank crews facing M18 Hellcats in combat, 3 minutes represented a lifetime of experience compressed into moments of terror. For most of them, sadly, those 3 minutes were all the lifetime they had remaining.